providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Success is a Choice Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Jamie Beckler, and we appreciate you watching this on YouTube, Rumble. Maybe you're listening to this on your favorite audio streaming service, Spotify, Apple, or whatever you choose to listen to. We appreciate you joining us as usual. Today, we have a very, very special guest on this show. We have Larry Elder. He is a former presidential candidate for the governorship of California, received over 3 million votes for that. He's an author. He's a lawyer. He's a syndicated talk show host. Larry Elder has done a lot. So Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. You didn't say sex symbol, and you didn't mention, Jamie, that the LA Times called me the black face of white supremacy. So I got that on my resume. I worked hard for that title.
You worked hard for that title. Yeah, I typically don't mention all the nicknames that people have because, if I had like a Ric Flair on or a Hollywood Hulk Hogan or somebody like that, we'd be going forever just on their nicknames alone. But let's start off with one of the toughest questions, or one of the things that is dying for me to ask you every time I see you speak, on stage or you go on a show or whatever. You're always dressed nicely, but your shoe game is on point. The show is Success is a Choice. So how do you successfully choose which shoes you're going to wear?
It's called having my girlfriend named Nina, who says, you're going to wear this. We've been with her about 20 years, Jamie. And at one point she used to say, are you wearing that? Are you wearing that? And so I figured I'd cut out the middleman. And so now I just say, tell me what to put on. She buys my shoes. I wear what she puts out.
Yeah, when I was coaching, I would wear suits and ties, every game. And we actually had a spreadsheet. My wife would put together all our suits, all of our ties, and we had a spreadsheet. We didn't go quite, with Polaroids or pictures, but the spreadsheet was good enough for me. But yeah, your shoe game is on point. It's always pretty nice. But
thank you.
So seriously though, Success is a Choice, name of our podcast. You've had a lot of success. You've had a lot of achievements in your life. What's maybe one or two choices that you've made that you look back on and you're like, man, that was maybe not defining, but you know what? I'm really glad I made that choice.
Jamie, I really can't say there was one or two instances where I had some sort of epiphany and I said, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. I was raised by two hard-working, loving parents, my father and my mother. My dad and I didn't always get along. I wrote a book about it called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, where after not speaking to him for 10 years, we sat down and we talked when I was 25 years old. And I found out that my father never knew his biological father. My last name, Elder, is the name of some dude who's in his life the longest. And he was an alcoholic who physically was abusive to my dad, physically abusive to my dad's mom. My dad's mom was illiterate. He lived off a series of men, all of which my dad told me in an 8-hour conversation. And he said he came home at the age of 13, Jamie, and began quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. Mom sides with the boyfriend and throws my father out of the house, never to return. You're talking about a black boy born in 1915, Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South, at the very beginning of the Great Depression. And I said, well, Dad, what did you do? And for the next several hours, again, he told me about his life. Walked down a dirt road, picked up trash, cleaned out barns. Ultimately, he became a Pullman porter on the trains. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And this little black boy from Athens, Georgia, was able to travel all around the country. And he came to this place called California, a city called Los Angeles. And my dad was blown away. You could walk through the front door of a restaurant and get served. My dad always had crackers with him and tin cans of tuna because he said you never knew in the South. if you'd be able to get a meal. So he made a middle note, maybe someday I'll relocate to California. Pearl Harbor, my dad joins the Marines. I asked him why. He said 2 reasons. They go where the action is. I love the uniforms. So my dad was stationed on the island of Guam, World War II. He was in charge of cooking for the colored soldiers because, as you know, the military was segregated in those days. So my father got out. My father can look at a cake and tell you what's in it. He's that good. Goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he met and married my mom to get him a job as a short order cook. And he was told to his face, pardon me the language, we don't hire niggers. My dad goes to the unemployment office. Lady says, you went through the wrong door. My dad goes out to the hall and sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. She just wanted him to know what the rules were. He came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to LA where I was before the war. I'm gonna get me a job as a cook and I'll spend for you. So my dad comes out to LA. He walks around for about a day and a half. And he's told to his face, restaurant after restaurant, I'm sorry, you have no references. When my dad said he cooked in the military, they kept saying, I'm sorry, you have no references. My dad said, I need references to make ham and eggs. He'd been offered to work for free for 2 weeks for a written reference, and nobody would do that. Goes to the unemployment office, this time just one door, and the lady says, I don't have anything. My dad said, what time do you open? She says, 8 o'clock. What time do you close? She says, 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting in that chair till you find something. He sat in the chair for a whole day, came back the next day. She calls him up around lunchtime and says, I have something. I don't know whether you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. What is it? I'm raising a family. She said, it's a job cleaning toilets at Nabisco Bread Company. My dad did that for over 10 years, took a second full-time job cleaning toilets at another bread company, cooked for a family on the weekend to make additional money because he wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom, went to night school to get his GED, and then after that went to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant. The man never slept, which is why he was so grouchy all the time. So fast forward, late 40s, my dad starts a small cafe in an area of LA called Pico Union, ran that until his 80s, mid-80s. And when my dad retired, he owned that property next door, plus a little home that's still in our family. My dad retired with a net worth of close to $1 million, all because he worked hard. And my dad always told my brothers and me the following: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. He said, Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you moan or groan about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, he said this: no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen to you. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. So that's the kind of person I grew up with. My mom was the very same way. She grew up on a farm in Huntsville. My mom always told us nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. And her big drive was education, education. Oh, by the way, and education. So I always knew I was going to be successful at something. I can't tell you I thought my life was going to evolve the way it did, but I always knew I was going to be successful at something because I always wanted to work hard. I made good grades. I wanted to please my parents. And I knew that was a path of success going forward.
Well, and it looks like you did. You ended up graduating from Crenshaw High School in South Central LA. You went to Brown University, an Ivy League school.
Although I don't brag about that anymore.
Well, it still has a lot of credibility with a lot of people out there, the Ivy Leagues. And then you went to the University of Michigan Law School. So certainly you took your father's words to heart about hard work. Some people would say that hard work has kind of lost its luster, or it's not something that people want to do anymore. I know I face that with my son. It's a battle. I face that with myself, getting out of bed every morning and trying to run a business, the hard work thing. Talk a little bit about working hard, because you worked hard, back in the day, as my son will tell me all the time. How about working hard now? How can you still do that?
Well, overcoming laziness is one of the hardest things in life there is. And everybody has that feeling. It's hard to get motivated. But what's the alternative? There's a line in a song that said, if there was another path, another way of success, I'd have found it. There just isn't another way. Unless you put in the time and you do it consistently, you're not going to be successful. We live in a competitive world. And if you're unwilling to do it, somebody else is going to be willing to do it. I was on a sailboat once when I was living in Cleveland, Jamie, and I'm on there with a bunch of other people. I'm talking to this guy, happened to be white. And he started complaining about his job, whining about it. And I said to him, what are you going to do about it? He said, what do you mean? I said, you're going to sit here and just whine about your job the rest of your life? You're going to do something about it. And Jamie, I had completely forgotten about this conversation. Fast forward maybe 20 years later, I'm on the radio and I get an email from somebody, and he reminded me of the conversation he had on that sailboat on Lake Erie 20 years earlier. And he said after that conversation, he decided to quit his job, started a business, and now he has about 25 employees, does between $5 and $10 million a year. Had I not put my foot up, as you know what he said, I probably would not have left that job. I probably would have continued moaning about it. It would not have turned my life around. And my point is, everybody has moments where they feel afraid, they feel weak, they're not quite sure what to do. But it's all about getting things together, looking yourself in the eye and saying, it's all up to you. As you say in your podcast, success is a choice.
Well, you mentioned your father and all the things that he did, all the menial labor jobs and all the doors that were slammed in his face and all the obstacles that he faced along the way. And yet he still made a success of himself family-wise, financially. He ended up being very successful financially. I would say that it's much harder when he was going through that than it is today. All the obstacles in his way in terms of, you might call systemic stuff that's in his way as opposed to it is now.
No question about it, Jamie. It was exponentially harder for him. I mean, we're talking about serious systemic racism, Jim Crow, KKK. Nothing like that right now. In fact, there was a study done by Time Magazine and CNN back in 1997. So we're talking about 26 years ago. Black teens and white teens were asked whether racism was a major problem in America. And both of them said yes. But then they asked the black teens, is racism a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in your own daily life? 89% called it a small problem or no problem in their own daily life. In fact, twice as many black teens compared to white teens said failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism. That was 26 years ago, before the election of Barack Obama, before his reelection. Even black teens understood that the real way to success are choices that you make. And as we speak right now, Jamie, there are Haitians lining up in Haiti for a lottery to get into America. Why? Because America is systemically racist. It is nonsense. It's what the left, the media, academia, Hollywood, big tech is putting in the minds of people, in my opinion, in order to maintain power. Because what they want to do is get black people angry about things like social justice. So they pull that lever 90% to the Democratic Party and they remain in power. It is disgusting to me, the way they're telling people that they're victims, dividing people into oppressors and the oppressed. It is an absolute outrage.
Well, as somebody that grew up with a father who was in the Jim Crow South in Georgia, and somebody who grew up in South Central LA, you've seen a lot of this. You've seen a lot of examples of racism, a lot of examples of challenges to overcome. What would you say to somebody? We have a lot of educators, leaders, coaches, people who deal with young people, particularly black people. How would you address them, or what would you tell them as they work with young people?
I would tell them that anybody who tells you that America is still plagued by systemic racism is lying to you. Dave Rubin is a very popular podcaster. He used to be a person of the left. And a few years ago, he had me on his show and he was talking about systemic racism. And I said, please give me an example. He said, well, I would imagine that most people would tell you that police are an example of systemic racism. I said, really? Studies going back over decades have shown the police are more hesitant, more reluctant, if anything, to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. There's a black Harvard economist named Roland Fryer, who's from the inner city, as I am, and he assumed, because of the death of people like Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, a guy named Freddie Gray in Baltimore, a guy named Laquan McDonald in Chicago, that the police were killing black people just because they were black, and he decided to do a study to corroborate that. He said the findings were the most shocking of my professional career. Not only were the police not killing black people just because they were black, they were more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. The police kill more white people every year than black people. They kill more unarmed white people every year than unarmed black people. It is a lie that's getting people killed. How so? You're telling young black men when they're pulled over, don't cooperate. Because why would you cooperate and think the cop is going to hurt you? My father told me if I'm pulled over by the cop, make sure my left hand is at 10 o'clock, make sure my right hand is at 2 o'clock. Say yes, sir, say no, sir. Make sure your paperwork is in order. If you feel you're mistreated, get a badge number, and you and I will go downtown and deal with it while we're both still alive. That's the advice people should be given. There's nothing that holds you back today other than yourself.
That's some interesting advice. I think that's good advice for anybody. Certainly something I want to impart to my son when he starts driving. Heaven help us all when he starts driving. But you know, a lot of the people that watch this show, a lot of the coaches and leaders and educators out there, they support Black Lives Matter, or they support at least the ideals of Black Lives Matter. And it seems that it's something that, why would we not support that? But you've been pretty critical or outspoken about the organization. What are some ways that maybe we can support the concept of Black Lives Matter without going all in on the organization, which you've been critical of?
Well, Jamie, all lives matter. That's the first problem with Black Lives Matter, acting as if somehow Black people's lives are more important than non-Black people's lives. The reason Black Lives Matter started was because of the shooting death of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman was found not guilty by the jury, and the jury said that race had nothing whatever to do with it. Fast forward, the reason we had the George Floyd riots beginning in May 2020 that was pushed by Black Lives Matter is because of the assumption that what Officer Derek Chauvin did or didn't do to George Floyd had to do with George Floyd's race. Remember, the trial was televised. The lead prosecutor was a Black man. The most important part of a trial is the opening statement. And this Black prosecutor took pains to say the police in general are not on trial. He said that they have to do a very important life or death job in a matter of seconds. He said the Minneapolis PD in general was not on trial, and mentioned by name several of the officials at the Minneapolis PD for whom he had a lot of respect. He said this individual is on trial for what this individual did or didn't do to George Floyd. He never even suggested that what Derek Chauvin did had anything to do with George Floyd's race, and Derek Chauvin was never charged with a hate crime. Yet you had 4 months worth of protests in America, millions of people protesting in the streets, sometimes violently, 25 people killed, $2 billion worth of insured damage, Jamie, and maybe another billion or two of uninsured damage, all because of an assumption that what happened to George Floyd had to do with their race, where there was zero evidence of it. Now, how damaging is this? There's a magazine on website called policemag.com. And people that were self-described as very liberal, and I submit to you that most, if not all of the people in the streets protesting, if you ask them to describe their ideology, they would have said we are very liberal. This magazine asked people who self-described as very liberal, how many unarmed Black men did the police kill in 2019? Unarmed Black men. Half of them, Jamie, thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed Black men in 2019. 8% thought they killed 10,000. What you asked, did just the regular liberal people think? 39% of self-described liberal people thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed Black men in 2019. 5% thought they killed 10,000. The answer, according to the Washington Post database, was 12. 12. That's why so many people were in the streets, because of a false assumption that this happens all the time, when in fact it is rare. One more thing, just because you were unarmed does not mean you are not dangerous or not perceived as dangerous. Years ago, there was a Black man, an immigrant in New York, who fit the description of a violent criminal. The police surrounded him and said, "Show me your hands, show me your hands." He didn't understand what they were saying, and he reached for his wallet, and they shot and killed him. Even Hillary called these officers murderers. The jury, multi-ethnic jury, found the police not guilty because he was reasonably perceived as a threat. Michael Brown was unarmed in Ferguson. He had just done a strong armed robbery. His DNA was found on the officer's gun, indicating he was charging to get the officer's gun. But just because you were unarmed does not mean you were not perceived legitimately as a threat. When you get down to the number of Black people killed unlawfully, you're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. It is rare. And again, there are more whites who are killed that way than there are Blacks. But the media doesn't care about that. They only care when a Black person is killed by a white officer, giving you the false impression it happens all the time, when in fact it is rare.
Well, you mentioned your father quite a bit. You talked about the story of his upbringing growing up in the Jim Crow South, and you two being estranged for a number of years, and then writing a book about that and your reconciliation. But you also had another strong figure in your life, your mother. And you used to have her on your radio show regularly to debate you or to talk about issues because she didn't agree with all the things that you said. She was essentially a lifelong Democrat. You were a Republican. So taking kind of meshing those two things together, your mom, bringing her on the show, having disagreements with her, but then also the stuff that you just talked about with the Black Lives Matter and the false narrative in facts that maybe we don't always have. How can people in their classrooms or people with their sports teams, coaches with their sports teams, or talking with your friends or your family members, how can you kind of bridge that gap of disagreements or not understanding things?
Can I just say one more thing about Black Lives Matter before I mention my mom? Black Lives Matter was founded by self-described trained Marxists. Marx was the father of the narrative that the world can be divided into two camps, those who are oppressed and those who oppress them. Also on Black Lives Matter's website, they talk about the myth of the nuclear intact family. The number one problem in the Black community, Jamie, in my humble opinion, is the absence of fathers in the household. 70% of Black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965 when Lyndon Johnson launched a so-called war on poverty. And since then, we've incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And the numbers are clear. Even Barack Obama once quoted them. If you're raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. It is the number one social problem facing America, and Black Lives Matter is attacking the nuclear intact family. Give me a break. It is a dangerous organization, and anybody that subscribes to their philosophy ought, in my opinion, to rethink. About my mom. As I mentioned earlier, my mom told my brothers and me, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. She was a lifelong Democrat, and my mom and my dad was a lifelong Republican. And you should have been a fly on the wall to hear some of their arguments. But nobody called anybody a fascist. Nobody called anybody a Nazi. Nobody says you only care about the rich. You don't care about the poor. They argued passionately, but they argued civilly. I took a course in high school called African American Literature. You read a poem by a guy named County Cullen, and it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean, people looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, despite what my mom told me, it made me angry. The teacher who was Black was angry. My class was all Black. They were all angry. My teacher talked about how this is going to be a permanent stain on this kid's psyche. He'll always think of himself as a second-class citizen and never feel part of the family of America. So I'm walking home, and Jamie, I knew my mom was going to have a different reaction to the poem. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew it would be different. So I walk into the kitchen. She's stirring a big pot of greens and frying chicken wings, my favorite. And I said, Mom, we read a poem in class. I want to get your reaction to it. She said, what is it? I said, it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean, people looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mom took the spoon out of the pot and said, Larry, what a darn shame he allowed something like that to spoil his vacation. How many wings do you want?
Yeah, I like that. I like the response, the control what you can control. And no one, like you said, no one can make you feel inferior. No one can make you feel a certain way.
You know, Jamie, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and I had a very close friend. Let's call him Paul. I met him in the 2nd grade. We had common interests. He loved sports. I loved sports, except he was a gifted athlete. I was not. And we had a common interest in Marvel Comics. Perry became the quarterback of the football team. He became the starting shooting guard in the basketball team, was the best pitcher in the baseball team. He never took a tennis lesson. He hit a backboard for 2 or 3 weeks and then tried out and made the tennis team. That's how good he was. However, he had an attitude. He had a kind of a Muhammad Ali catches play attitude. Not only would he beat you, but he would taunt you as he was beating you. It turns out his parents were divorced. He was one of the few kids raised by a single mom in my neighborhood. And I look back at it now and I see the damage it did, but I just didn't see it then. So he would come late to practice. He would fast the coach, but he would still play. One time he came late, the coach dressed him down in front of the other players, and Paul took off his jersey. I'm not making this up, Jamie. Balled it up and threw it in the coach's face. And he still started because the coach wanted to win. However, when the colleges came to recruit him, Notre Dame came, North Carolina came, UCLA, Duke, they all came. They heard about this phenom. And then they asked the coach, I'm going to say, I know you're a coach, what kind of head does he have? And the coach told the truth. He was a coach killer. He didn't do what he's told. He'll undermine the morale. Bye-bye Notre Dame. Bye-bye UCLA. Bye-bye USC. He ended up going to a small college. It was D1, but it was not known for basketball, and he was angry. And I advised him to buckle down, do well, and then transfer to a big-name D1 school and continue your dream of pursuing the NBA. Instead, he was so angry, began smoking dope. Ultimately, he dropped out of the basketball program. Now, I go away to college. I go away to law school, and I'd come back to visit him. Each time I visited him, he was angrier than the time before. Changed his name to a Muslim name because he wanted nothing to do with the Christian religion. And when I told him that Arab and Muslim slavers were involved in the slave trade out of Africa, he told me that I was lying. And we had this huge argument because he was talking about how systemic racism was holding Black people back. I said, dude, you and I grew up 6 blocks away from each other, went to the same school, had the same teachers, took the same classes. How come I'm successful and you're not? You are making an excuse. Look in the freaking mirror and take responsibility. And he never did. To this day, he never has.
Yeah, I think we all know those kind of people. You know, unfortunately, that's not an exception in this world. You have those people that make poor choices, and then that's one of the reasons we're doing the podcast, is to help provide examples or to provide people with some insights or thoughts about maybe they can approach life or see things a little bit differently, look at a perspective or get out of their cave, you know, or at least see the whole forest and not just their tree. So we appreciate that story.
And that's the deal, Jamie. I went to my 20th high school reunion, and the people that were buckled down, that had studied, that were minding the teachers, they were inevitably more successful than the knuckleheads who came. Many of the knuckleheads didn't come at all because over the course of the next 20 years, they weren't as successful as those who buckled down and tried to invest in themselves. And it's that simple. Invest in yourself, and you'll be better off than those who did not. And the only excuse is the person in the mirror.
Well, he's Larry Elder. We definitely appreciate his time. Definitely check out his stuff, LarryElder.com. Check out his books. He's got so many good books that'll make you think. His most recent one is about saving California. So it's more on the political side of things, but there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of things to get your mind percolating about just the way we think about everything. And so definitely check that out on Twitter, or on X, I should say, at Larry Elder. And also, if you are in Hollywood, check out his star on the wall, the Walk of Fame.
Can you believe that?
Now, do you head over there every once in a while to just get a little ego boost, a bit of confidence after you've seen some people saying some nasty stuff online or whatever?
Jimmy, I don't, but I will tell you, my older brother Kirk, who's no longer with us, used to go down to Hollywood with my little brother, and we would walk down that street. My brother knew all these stars. Don't ask me how he knew them. He knew Fatty Arbuckle. He knew Douglas Fairbanks. He knew all of them. And I didn't even care about movies. I couldn't care less about all these people. And now I'm on the corner. I'm not only on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I'm on the corner of Hollywood and Vine, southeast corner of Hollywood and Vine, arguably the most famous intersection in the history of the world. That's where I am. I mean, only in America.
Why I know it because that's Kid Rock. It was in a Kid Rock song. That's how I first knew about it. But I should have known about it because of your star on the Walk of Fame. So Larry Elder, at Larry Elder on Twitter. at Larry Elder's Show on Instagram. We definitely appreciate your time. And to everybody out there watching, thanks so much for your time as usual. Go ahead and give it a little thumbs up or smash that like button. Or if you really care about your phone or tablet, just tap it so you don't break the screen. But maybe share the show with somebody else. But until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?